Buenos días, les damos la bienvenida al conversatorio sobre cómo ser una persona de alto desempeño. Hoy nos acompaña Peter Van Dausen, quien lleva 30 años investigando la relación entre actividad eléctrica del cerebro, la actividad mental y la conductual de las personas. Es el creador de la metodología de entrenamiento completo del cerebro Brain Trainer para Neurofeedbak. Hemos querido acercar a Peter más hacia Latinoamérica para que comparta sus conocimientos y experiencias. Por eso lo hemos invitado a participar de nuestro conversatorio, que en esta ocasión será 100% en inglés para darle mayor agilidad. En próximos días les estaremos enviando la grabación del conversatorio y la transcripción en español. Al finalizar la presentación de Peter, tendrán un espacio para preguntas. Les solicitamos escribirlas en el cuadro de preguntas que se encuentra al lado derecho de sus pantallas. Las pueden escribir en inglés o en español. Al finalizar el conversatorio, haremos una pequeña encuesta. Les solicitamos su colaboración respondiéndola, ya que la información que nos brinden es muy importante para próximos conversatorios. Vamos a dar inicio, agradecemos su participación y esperamos disfruten del tema de hoy. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much. Okay, hopefully everybody's hearing okay. So you can follow what we're saying here. I'm going to start talking about developing the ability in your life, in your brain, to produce what's called peak performance. If you're a professional and you're working with clients, then this is a good thing for clients too. Many people are excited by the ability not just to fix a problem, but to actually resolve in a way that they're able to become better in every area of their lives. So what we're going to do today in the beginning is to sort of explain to you why we train brains in order to make this happen. Many of the people who work with mental health problems obviously have been trained in theories of the mind and how to work with the mind. But what we know from having done research over the past 30, 40, 50 years in the area of mental health and human behavior is that the mind really does not control things. In fact, probably all of you know this. Almost certainly there are things that you do over and over in your life, whether it's particular actions you take or whether it's just getting anxious when something new comes along. Things that, as we say, just happen in your life that you can look at with your conscious mind and say, gee, I have no reason to be anxious here. My life is good. I have people who love me and support me. I have food. I have a good family. I have a place to live. I have a good job. So there's no reason for me to be anxious, and I will just stop being anxious. But of course, that doesn't work because our minds are simply our experiences of our own brains. What actually controls things is the brain. And I'm going to explain that a little bit today. And then we'll talk about how working with the brain directly, instead of trying to go through the mind to change the brain, by working directly with the brain, you can actually change the way the mind works and change your whole life. All of us have these automatic responses that occur. Some of them are good. Some of them are things that, we're happy that we're able to do automatically. And there are others that we wish we could change. And we know now from research that those responses are actually encoded in the way the brain produces and uses energy, so that it's possible for me to look at an EEG recording of your brain and be able to tell you pretty accurately whether you are anxious, whether you have difficulty with anger, whether you have difficulty sleeping through the night, whether you might be obsessive or compulsive, whether perhaps even you have a history of trauma, many, many other things, because research has been done over many years that tells us what patterns appear in the brains of people who have those specific issues they would like to change that are not very often found in the brains of people who don't have those issues. Very simple example, research that was done with people who were anxious discovered that when you took a group of anxious people and made a subpopulation of them and then compared their brain maps, their subpopulation against the general population of databases that have been developed to record brain activity for many different people of many different ages who are considered not to have mental health problems, we find that in many cases, the anxious people have more fast activity in the right side of their brain than they do in the left side. And that's something which you almost never find in a person who doesn't have anxiety issues. So if I see that pattern when you do an assessment of your brain, then I can guess fairly accurately that you will have issues of anxiety. And that if we train that, the chances are that those issues of anxiety will change, will go away. And so where do those patterns come from? The patterns that are encoded in our brains. They're developed from before we're born, the experience we have in the womb, in our mothers, during the period when we're actually being born, and then the immediate period after we're born. Are we nurtured? Is the mother that we know the body of, is she still there? Does she care about us? Does she take care of us? Does she protect us? Does she make us feel safe? Or is it a very different experience? And then from that time on, but especially focused early in life, in our earliest experiences, every experience we have teaches our brain a new way of dealing with that type of experience, so that we develop rules, we develop strategies for dealing with different experiences, and those guide the way we grow and we develop. Now, in many cases, we probably all think about those things that we do regularly, those things that just happened, those things that we wish would not happen, but we don't seem to be able to stop them. We don't know where the anxiety came from. We don't know why we're anxious, but those things are in many cases called pathologies. We have anxiety disorder, or we have an attention disorder, or we have a depression disorder, or we have obsessive compulsive disorder. Many, many disorders. The number grows and grows and grows to the point where, at least in the United States, it has been estimated that almost half of the American population could be diagnosed with one or another of these disorders. Many of them, when I was young, which was a long time ago, were not disorders. I had friends who were shy when I was in school, friends who were timid, and we didn't think they were sick. We just knew that they were less comfortable in social situations than some of the others of us. Now we say they have social anxiety disorder. There are drugs for it. You can go do psychotherapy for it. So that's one way of looking at those kinds of things that a person might like to change. But one of the things that we say in Brain Trainer is you don't have to be sick to want to get to be better. So another way of looking at those things is to say, no, those are not sicknesses. They're not pathologies. They are things which I actually developed myself based on the experience that I had. And there's another word that we could use for that, and that word is habits. Anxiety is a habitual response. We do it over and over and over again, no matter how many times we experience that all of the things that we predicted would happen that would be bad, none of them happened. And being very anxious about it didn't really help me to avoid having them happen, but I still keep doing it. Call that a pathology or call it a habit. The difference is that in two areas. One of them is that the center of control or the locus of control between those two ways of looking at things is completely different. If I have a pathology, what can I do? Nothing. I'm sick. I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. I have to go see a doctor. I have to go see a psychologist. I have to go see a therapist or go see somebody. And whatever that person tells me to do, I have to do that. And if I ask them, is this going to fix the problem? In most cases, they will tell me quite honestly, we can't stop you from being anxious, but we can help you get to be able to deal with the anxiety better. So if we are sick, that's what we're up against. If I start taking drugs for my anxiety, I'm going to take those drugs for the rest of my life. If I take drugs for my attention problems, I'll probably be taking those drugs when I'm an adult. So I'm basically helpless in that situation. But if we say this is not a disorder, this is not a disease, this is not a pathology, this is a habit, that changes everything. Because there's only one person in the world who can change my habits, and that's me. I can't change your habits. I can't change my children's habits, but you can change them yourselves. Now we realize that that's not easy. We've all probably tried to change a habit, but we weren't able to. We worked at it for a while, and then we went back to doing what we did before because it was more natural. But the fact that we actually have that control empowers us, or at least offers that opportunity. And the other benefit of the difference between pathologies and habits is that you can't fix a pathology, at least in mental health, but in habits, if you can change the habit, then the new habit becomes as lasting and as automatic as the old habit did. So if you can teach your brain not to have the habit of anxiety as an automatic response, but to have the habit of looking for opportunities in every new thing that comes along as an automatic response, then we make changes that are lasting. And we don't have to keep training, or we don't have to keep taking drugs. We don't have to keep doing anything. We have a habit. So the question then always becomes, well, that's not very helpful to tell me that all I have to do is change my habits, because I have many habits I'd like to change. And a number of them I've tried to change, but I haven't been able to change my habits. It's very difficult to do. But the problem, as we know, again, from the research that's been done on how the brain works, is that in most cases when we're trying to change habits, what are we trying to do? We're working through the mind. The mind is just my experience of my brain. It doesn't drive my brain. It doesn't change my brain. So by trying to change a brain habit by working through the mind, we're working with very, very difficult situation. Yes, that's going to be extremely hard to do. But if we can change the way the brain works, if we can change those patterns in the brain's activity, which relate to the habit that we have, then the habit changes. It doesn't just change in the brain, it changes in our mental experience, and it changes in our whole lives. So how exactly do you go about changing a habit in the brain? Let's start by talking a little bit about the brain and how it works. Some of this, many of you may know, others of you, this may be new material, but I think it's very interesting. First of all, we need to understand, all of you know this, I'm sure, that the brain is split in half. It has a left hemisphere and it has a right hemisphere. The right hemisphere is related to tasks that require novelty, new things, things that we don't have any rules for. So it does put things into categories. It does recognize, okay, this is a bug, but it looks at the category and then it says, how is this bug different from other bugs? So it's always looking at how the individual is different from the category. That's very different from the left side. The left side, once it learns the category, it doesn't go beyond that. All bugs are the same. So if I see a bug, I kill it, or I run away and scream, or whatever I do. So we have the right and the left sides. And as you can imagine, when you're very young, when, as I mentioned before, is when you form most of these strategies, most of these ways of dealing with things, everything is new. Everything you see is new. It's different. And so your right hemisphere is very, very active when you're young. All new experience goes through the right hemisphere. In fact, we say that when the brain comes online, it comes online from the back to the front and from the right side to the left side. So when I was very young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, I was out in my backyard and I was walking around playing back there, and I saw these little bugs that were on flowers that my father was growing. And I thought that was interesting. So I went in and I got a jar and I came back out and I picked up one of the bugs and put it in the jar. Then I picked up another one, put it in the jar. I didn't realize at that time that these bugs were bees and that bees could sting. I realized that after I picked up the third bug and the third bug stung me. And then I had to make a change in my strategy. Don't touch all bugs. When you look at a bug, if it looks like this, then don't touch it. If it looks like this, like a butterfly or some other kind of insect, then it's okay. They're not going to hurt me. But it's possible that my brain would have said, all bugs are bad. All bugs can hurt you. And therefore, the rule that would go on to my left hemisphere is not the side of novelty. It's not the side of figuring out how to deal with new things. It is the rule book. The left side is all about rules. It's all about the strategies that we have, putting things into categories and dealing with them. Excuse me. Now, that's a very efficient way to work. As we get older, we're able to categorize most of our experience, and we're able to respond to most of the things that we run into in ways that are sort of built into our strategies. We don't have to think about them. But in my case, at least, I learned that there were bugs that could hurt me and there were bugs that couldn't hurt me. And so I had to figure out which ones were which, and my rules became more complicated. Okay, so what we're looking at is, as we grow older, the rules become more and more built in, more and more strong. But until by the time you become an adult, the chances are very good that you don't really expect to find many things that you haven't seen before, and you really don't use the novelty side very often. So when the brain is learning new things, it's probably one of the most powerful things that it's able to do. If you think about a perfect example that most of you probably have experienced, that is learning to ride a bicycle. You go out, you get on the bicycle, you try to ride it, you fall off. Then you do it again and you fall off. Each time you fall off, that's feedback. That feedback is telling the brain that's not the way to do it. You try again, you fall off at a different place, and the brain says, nope, that's not the right way either. My right hemisphere is still looking to find, how do I stay up on this? Because I've seen that people are able to ride on this thing and not fall over. And then eventually I get on, I start trying to ride, and I ride. I don't fall off. I keep going. At that moment, if someone said to you, what did you do differently? What did you learn? How did you learn how to do that? You would say, I have no idea. I don't know. I did the same thing that I always do, but the outcome was different. That's what happens when we learn in our brain. So if I deal with a person who's angry with me, but I have changed the way my brain responds, the rules that my brain has for dealing with people who are angry, so that instead of yelling back at them and getting into a fight, instead of that, I move away and I listen to them and I let them talk, and then I'm able to move on without having had a fight. That's a change in the rule. And what the person would say is, I don't know what I did differently. I did what I always do. I responded to the person, but the outcome was different. I didn't have a fight. So that's what we're trying to do in the brain, is to teach the brain things like not being anxious, things like not having to be obsessive, or whatever those things might be, to sleep differently, to not have headaches all the time, whatever those things are. Anything that comes from the brain, we can change by training the brain. We just need to find the patterns that relate to that thing and teach the brain how to shift those patterns. One thing that we know about the brain is that it learns from mirrors. Feedback is a mirror. In fact, that's just about the only way that brains learn. It's very important to understand, if we don't already know this, that there is no such thing as a normal brain or an abnormal brain, because every brain is different. Every brain is idiosyncratic. That is, it is completely itself, and only that brain is that way, because no two brains have the same experiences from the initial conditions, which is what happened when I was in the womb. Was my mother excited about being pregnant? Was my mother angry about being pregnant? Was she getting support? Was she getting abuse? Did she have money? Did she not have money? All of those things affect the child in the womb, because as a child, as an infant in the womb, I'm sharing the blood and the chemistry in the blood of my mother. So my brain starts to develop at that point. Then when I go through the process of being born, it's a very traumatic experience, but for some people it's more traumatic than others. Some people have the cord wrapped around their neck. Some people are a breech delivery where they try to go through the wrong way. There are many different things that can happen. Some people it takes 48 hours. Some people it takes 6 hours. and then what happens when you come out, how much you are nurtured, how much you're cared for, whether you're immediately removed from your mother and put into a nursery, an ICU nursery, or your mother has to get help for physical things that happen to her, so that that person is not there. That's one type of experience. And every experience that we have builds on those initial conditions and teaches us new rules, new strategies for dealing with life. So if we know that experience, that mirrors, that feedback create the brain the way it is, and we know that mirrors and feedback can change the brain, then why isn't the brain changing all the time? Because we have experience constantly throughout our lives. Well, the issue for most of us is two issues. One of them is most of the mirrors that we have that feed us back information about what we're doing and how people see us and all of that, they're very subjective. So last night I said something to my wife and she laughed. Today I said the same thing and she hit me. So my brain says, wait, how can I learn anything from that? I did the same thing, but the feedback was completely different. That's because the feedback is subjective. It depends on something other than what I do. All right, so it makes it difficult for the brain to count on learning from the feedback that it gets. The second thing is that the brain, the type of system that a brain is called self-reinforcing. That is because it has this left side with all the rules and all the categories and all the strategies, the brain tends to see what it expects to see. So a person who had a history of trauma and who is very fearful about the world is always looking for danger. They will always find danger. If you look for it, you'll find it, or at least find something that could be dangerous. And so it keeps reinforcing the fact that the world is dangerous. So we have to have something basically then in order to do the feedback, which is objective. It doesn't depend on subjective responses from someone else, and that it is it's new. It's something that we really haven't seen before, and it's also something which is easy to understand the feedback, and the feedback is very quick. It's immediate. So whole brain training, which is the system that we use for training brains, is something which is a perfect mirror for the brain. It's completely objective. You sit down at a computer and perhaps you're watching a film, or perhaps you're watching a game or something like that, but there is no judgment involved. There's no, it doesn't change depending on how you feel or whether you're afraid or not. The feedback is completely based on what your brain is doing. So we, let's say, have looked at your brain and we said, oh, there's a lot of fast activity on the right side. And she would like to reduce the anxiety. So what we'll do is we will put electrodes on the right side of this person's brain, and we will say, pay attention to this very, very fast activity, which is related to anxiety. And whenever that goes down below a certain level, then we'll give the brain feedback. And we'll say, that's good. That's good. Very good. Whoop, no. Now you're getting too fast. There you go. Now you're good. And what happens is the brain is getting that information immediately, and it is not something that's involving judgment. It's not something saying, oh, that's very bad. You're doing this, you're doing that. It just says, nope, that's not what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. So your brain can actually start to look around inside. And one thing you need to understand about brains is that brains believe that everything that happens in their lives is because of something they did. So, for example, a child, a newborn, whose mother gives him up for adoption immediately, or dies, or leaves and doesn't come back, that child doesn't understand that that was something that the mother did. The brain in the child says, what did I do to make her go away and leave me here all by myself? Brains literally do create the world we live in. If you and a friend spend any time together, or a family member or a partner, you quickly realize that although you're going through the same experiences, you may experience them completely differently. So each one of us has our own way of seeing the world. By giving the brain something as simple as a shadow, which gets darker over the video you're watching when you do the wrong, when your brain goes the wrong direction, and gets very clear so you can see the movie better when the brain is going the right direction, that's mathematical. It doesn't change. It's not based on anything subjective. But as that happens, the brain looks at it and says, why is that shadow getting darker and lighter? What am I doing? And it looks around and it discovers, oh, whenever I make more of this activity, it gets darker. Whenever I make less of that activity, it gets brighter. I like it better when it's brighter, so I'm going to practice making less of that activity. That's a new thing for the brain to learn. Just like riding a bicycle, when you first ride the bicycle, you can stay up, but you can't ride very fast, and you can't ride just on the back wheel of your bicycle, and you can't ride with no hands. But the more you practice riding, the more skilled you become, the better your brain learns how to balance and how to do those things in more complicated ways. And that's the same thing that we're looking for with this training. As we repeat a training that teaches the brain to make less of the very fast activity on the right side, the brain becomes easier and easier and easier to do that. Just like with yoga. The first time you try to get into a yoga pose, it's impossible. You have to just sort of get as close as you can. But if you keep practicing a little bit at a time, your body stretches out and you're able then to get into a pose that you couldn't get into before. One of the other benefits of brain training is that it's totally nonverbal. As those of you who do psychotherapy know, when you have to work with verbal approaches to problems, which you do if you're working with the mind in most cases, you have problems because language creates defensiveness. It creates resistance. So it's very important that you be non-directive and things like that, so that you don't cause the brain to respond negatively to what you're saying. Also, because it's nonverbal, it can work with things that are from very early in your life, 1 year old, 2 years old, before you were verbal. Many of the things that are habits in our brains are created in those very early times of our lives, before we even have language, before we could even begin to think about why did this experience happen? What can I do about it? We don't think about it. Our mind is not involved. It gets encoded into the way our brain operates. And so what we're really doing when we do brain training is we are giving the brain information specifically about its own energy patterns, something that it can't know any other way. But in that mirror, it can see what it's doing. And if you give the brain information about what it's doing real time, it can learn to change what it's doing. So let's talk for a little bit about the peak brain. It's an area which has been studied a great deal over the last 30, 35 years. Back in the 1960s and 70s, psychologists who had brain EEG machines went to China, they went to India, they met with Zen masters, and they met with Tai Chi masters and yogis. They met with many people who had brains that were capable of doing things that we didn't think was possible. And then more recently, work has been done with Top Gun pilots. What's the difference between a pilot who's a Top Gun and a competent pilot who can fly the plane in routine situations, has no problems, but has problems when the situation becomes more complicated? We've looked at the difference between great football players and good football players. What is there that makes Lionel Messi such an incredible player, such that he doesn't have physical tools that are greatly different from the others who play professional football with him, but he has something inside of his head that separates him from the others. The same thing is true with ballerinas, with singers. There are people who are able to function at the very highest level for long periods of time. Even in business, executives are another group that we can see, people who are top executives who deal with complex and stressful situations and move the organization through those situations in a positive way. So research has been done with all of those people to look at how their brains are, and can we figure out what's the difference between their brains and the rest of ours. The first thing that we try to do is to see what they all have in common. And although each one of those brains is different, there are certain things that they're able to do that most of us can do and probably have experienced briefly in our lives, but we can't do them for very long and we don't have a choice. But what are some of the characteristics of a peak brain? Well, first of all, it's very balanced. So it doesn't become extremely anxious. It doesn't become silly and not able to notice when there are dangers around. It is able to move in both directions. It's not stuck in any one place. It's also conscious, aware. So it's able to be aware of things going on around itself. And all of us have, either sometimes ourselves or being with children or being with clients, we're aware that those people aren't really in touch with what's going on around them. They're inside their heads. That's a good place to be, but it's very important to be able to be outside and aware of what's going on around you, and then also to be able to move inside and be aware of what is going on inside of you, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and all of those things. They need to have the ability to process. Processing is very important, and that is a task that the mind is very involved with. Processing information, learning new things, applying things, planning, all of those kinds of processes are very important. They are the things that allow the brain to work in the sense that many of us think about working. So a person whose brain is stuck in very slow frequencies, where they're very creative or they're very intuitive, but they cannot do things that require them to use language or to use logic or to be rational, those people are limited because they can't train the whole range of what we want to be able to do in terms of processing. Very important one, especially in our life today, is that the peak brains are very efficient. That is, that they are able to work within an extremely complicated system inside the brain, but not waste energy. So that many of us, and this is true, for example, of the pilots who were the competent pilots, all of the pilots were able to get into an autopilot state where they were able to be still and present and just aware of everything that was going on around them, but not having to change anything. Then they would go into a situation where something happened, where an alarm went off or something like that, and they had to shift into faster frequencies. They had to process, they had to respond, and then when they fixed the problem, how quickly were they able to go back into the resting state? The more you're able to go back into the resting state quickly, and after each task, the less energy you use and the more effectively your brain can work. The ability to have different areas of the brain that work independently but share information is very important. In many brains that I see, I sometimes tell the client, it's like you have a basketball team, but all 5 of the players are trying to bring the ball down the court instead of the other 4 getting prepared to do something that they're supposed to do separately. They work together, they're a team, but each member of the team has a different function. If the brain is locked together in some areas, then you don't have the independence, and it takes you a lot more energy to do something than it should. And so you get tired more easily. And very important, the brain has to be integrated. That is, the things that are in our, what psychology calls the subconscious, those would be things like our memories and our emotions and our moods. We need to be in contact with those. We can't afford to have those blocked off, as many people who have trauma histories do. There are many things that they don't want to know, they don't want to re-experience, and they don't want to integrate into their lives. So the ability to actually pull the entire brain, the unconscious brain, the subconscious brain, and the conscious brain together into a single whole is very important. So we look at equilibrium. We see, first of all, that fast beta, which is the frequency of hypervigilance, which we see when people are very anxious, that needs to be low. We don't want to see that. We also want the level of activity in the autonomic nervous system to only be high when we're in an emergency situation. Many people are in emergency situations all the time, even though they aren't really emergencies, and so they use a tremendous amount of energy. And there's a frequency called sensory motor rhythm, which is related to the ability to be physically relaxed and to have good hormone function. And the ability to do those things is important as well in terms of allowing the body to take care of itself. Consciousness involves that or awareness involves that we have a frequency that's called alpha, which is synchronized. That is the autopilot state. That's sometimes you get into your car, you drive from home to someplace that you've been many times, and if there's not a lot of traffic, and if it's not raining or something, or you're not having an earthquake, you're able to drive an autopilot. You don't have to think about what you're doing while you're driving. It's also called the observer state. That is, you're aware of what's going on around you and within you, but you're only observing it. You're not trying to constantly be changing it. And therefore, when you're able to be aware in the awareness state, you are conserving energy. Processing requires that we have the ability to process in beta, to stay in that faster frequency, which is involved with language processing, involved with calculations and so forth, and is also related to our ability to think in hierarchies and steps and to process logically and rationally. Efficiency is related to two measures called coherence and synchrony. Those are measures of how well the brain is able to rest when it doesn't have anything to do, how well it's able to work independently when it does have something to do among all of its different areas. There is a frequency called gamma, which is very important in having the brain's ability to work together be very strong. Okay, those are related to efficiency. The ability to stay calm, still, quiet when you don't have anything to be doing. That's something that's very difficult for people in our culture. I've got to get my smartphone out. I've got to check and see if I've got any emails, if I've got any social media. I'm constantly having to check on things instead of just being still. When I lived in Brazil, we lived very near the ocean. And toward the end of the time that I was there, in around 2018, 2019, I began seeing very strange things. We would go out with our dogs to walk at night on the beach or on the sidewalk beside the beach. And I would see a person who was sitting right at the edge of the ocean with a beautiful moon, a full moon, the reflection of the moon coming across the water, just a gorgeous thing to look at, very peaceful, very spiritual. And the person would be looking at their cell phone. They wouldn't even be looking at what was in front of them. So the ability to stay in that neutral state, in that calm, relaxed state, and rest and allow the quiet voice of our spirits to speak to us is something which is lost by many people in our culture, and that leads to anxiety and many other problems. Integration involves the ability to become aware of ourselves, to know who I am, what I believe about myself, what I think I do well, what I think I don't do so well. We also need to have the ability to go into what we call deep states, where I can go down into my memory, into my emotions, and also unconscious states, which some people believe actually are a connection between us and everything else, which are also called transpersonal states. Those are all things which, the more we can combine those with our conscious thinking experience, the more integrated we will be and the healthier we'll be. So when we do training, here are the things that we're going to work on. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for the patterns that exist in this brain before we start. And we're going to try to break up those patterns, those habits, which are blocking us or are keeping us in states that we don't want to be in, that keep us with habits that we would like to change. We want to increase the capacity of our brains to change, to go inside, to go outside, to be able to be open, to be closed in. Open and closed focus are two very important issues, being able to move back and forth between those two. Once a person has started to make themselves more flexible, break up the old habits and start new ones forming, which are more flexible, then that allows us to move into the subconscious material and begin to integrate things that we forgot, things that we don't want to remember, things that we didn't ever deal with. The ability to learn that because something was important for us to do when we were 4 years old doesn't mean that that's necessarily the best thing for us to do now that we're 34 years old. And the last issue is developing the ability to synchronize alpha and gamma. Those two frequencies create what's called the zone. And in the zone, I'm able to do something that I've practiced many times. Could be cooking, could be playing a sport, could be playing a musical instrument or singing or running a business or whatever it is. But I can do those things in an autopilot state without wasting energy and do them at a very, very high level. That's called being in the zone. And the zone or the flow state is a measure of our ability to do peak performance. So I appreciate your patience. Let's see if there are any questions that anyone has that I can answer.
Hi, Peter. We have time for one question.
Okay.
Let's see. Marta is asking, what connection exists between a good sleep and peak performance?
Between good sleep and everything, there's a huge connection. In fact, in brain training, one of the first priorities always is to normalize sleep. If you have a person who's very anxious or depressed or obsessive or has difficulty with focus or almost anything, that person will have disturbances in sleep, probably 80 or 90% of the time. And if you can fix that, which is very responsive to brain training, then in many cases, 40 or 50% of all the other problems will just go away because you started being able to sleep properly. It's very, very important. Good question.
Okay, thank you.
That's it? Okay.
I think we have time for one more. Let's see.
Yeah, that would be great.
Melissa is asking, is conditioning the only way the brain can learn new habits?
Actually, I wouldn't consider it conditioning, but I'd consider it to be feedback, yes. The brain is what's called a complex adaptive system. It's a chaotic system. So it's not like the engine in your car where you can look at two things and say, oh, it's the fuel injection system or it's the electrical system that the problem is. Chaotic systems are very large systems which are made up of many smaller systems that interact with each other, and they interact by sharing feedback. So the things that I've said about the brain, number one, that it's very dependent on its initial conditions, what life was like in the womb, what birth was like, what happened when I came out. And it's very dependent on the experience that it has, which is another way of thinking of mirrors and feedback. And then, let's see, what was I going to say? Well, so the bottom line is that in the end, feedback is the one way that anybody knows that an adaptive system can change itself. The issue of also of being self-reinforcing, it goes along with that same kind of issue. But if you can give the brain new information, just like you can learn new things even when you're old. I remember very well, I was in my late 20s, middle 20s. So I wasn't that old, but I thought I pretty much knew everything there was to know about the universe. The first time I went to Brazil. And when I landed and saw the city of Sao Paulo, I realized this was not like any place I had ever been before. And when I met Brazilian people in the city where I lived, the little town where I lived, when you met a person, you would shake hands. You'd stand fairly far apart and shake hands with each other and say hi. When I met people in Brazil, people that I'd never met before, they'd throw their arms around me, they'd hug me, the girls would kiss me. It was very nice. I liked it. So I learned a tremendous amount in a very short time, it actually changed the way that I lived my life. But it was just based on the fact that I was in a place where I was speaking a language that I didn't know very well. I was meeting people, I knew almost nobody there. The culture was completely different. Everything about the place that I was in was completely different. And my right hemisphere woke up. My right hemisphere said, okay, I'll take care of this. And so I learned from the feedback that I got what worked, what didn't work, and I changed some of the rules that I had in the left side of my head. Reading books and studying and taking courses probably don't help very much. There are some techniques of psychotherapy, rebirthing, for example, and some others that attempt to take us back through a process and in some ways make it a whole new process, even though we've already been through it, so that we experience it again in a new way. We shift to our right side. We discover new ways of dealing with things based on the feedback we get in this new attempt to go through that same situation. And that can change what's on the left side. But I'm not aware of anything else that does it.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
We are going to talk about important information for all. This is in Spanish. Marta is going to present.
Very good. Well, I
Thank
appreciate
you.
the chance to talk with you all, and hope you have a great rest of the workshop. Goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
Hola a todos, buenos días.
Siga, Marta.
Gracias, Luz Estela. En este conversatorio les vamos a mostrar, para terminarlo, un paquete muy importante, una información muy importante que van a tener acerca de los equipos que les pueden ayudar para hacer un entrenamiento cerebral. Este paquete es un paquete ideal para todas las personas que quieren iniciar un proceso de entrenamiento de su cerebro. Es muy importante porque pensamos que pues, podemos invertir en una caminadora o podemos invertir en un plan para hacer ejercicio y entrenar nuestro cuerpo. Para eso también es importante un paquete como el que les vamos a mostrar o les estamos mostrando en este momento, que es el paquete ideal de entrenamiento, que está compuesto por un amplificador de 4 canales. Es una pequeña cajita que se va a conectar a un computador con el software Brain Trainer BioEra, que es nuestra última innovación en la metodología de Brain Trainer. Y tenemos una banda de hemoencefalografía, que es una banda que se conecta alrededor de la cabeza y nos ayuda para entrenar los frontales y prefrontales de nuestro cerebro. Está acompañado también de una gorra TC26, que es una gorra que se coloca en la cabeza y tiene localizados unos puntos específicos en donde se hace el entrenamiento. También está compuesto del curso de Introducción Brain Trainer U, que es el curso que las personas aprenden para trabajar, hacer su primer entrenamiento y hacer el desarrollo del resto de entrenamiento. Y el proceso también termina con un cuestionario que se les entrega para que ustedes contesten, y con ese cuestionario se hace un procesamiento de todo el manejo de sus frecuencias cerebrales y se desarrolla un plan de entrenamiento específico para cada uno. Que ustedes hagan una inversión en este equipo es algo muy interesante, porque aparte de poderlo usar ustedes, también lo pueden usar en su familia o con sus familiares o con sus amigos. Y en nuestra página pueden encontrar el precio, que en este momento está en $2,565 dólares, perdón. Y ustedes pueden entrar a nuestra página www.braintrainer.com, en donde pueden ampliar más información y pues serán bienvenidos. Estamos listos para atenderlos y para atender también todas sus inquietudes. Este es nuestro plan para hoy. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos, Luz Estela. ¿Puedes seguir?
Bueno, gracias Marta. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su participación. Los invitamos a contestar la encuesta que aparecerá enseguida y tenemos próximos conversatorios. Los pueden encontrar en nuestra página neurocienciaaplicada.org/eventos. Esperamos contar con su participación. Muchas gracias. Feliz día para todos.